This is NASCA's Top 10 virtual series. We are really excited to talk about how to utilize innovative tools and processes to enhance the customer experience. We have some awesome panelists today that are going to dive into this topic, as well as really give a state perspective on having a robust experience and talking about who is our customer, what is excellent customer service, is our role to help those that are our internal agencies, as well as to help those who are the citizens, the ultimate citizens. So thank you so much. This is actually hosted by our Operational Excellence Forum, which is a group that have met for a while. And with that, I'm going to actually kick it over to John Powell from the state of Illinois to talk to this group about what is the Operational Excellence Forum before we get started today. John, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jamie. It has been a pleasure for us here in Illinois to help co-moderate the NASCA Operational Excellence Forum with you and NASCA over the past couple of years. And this forum has met regularly, usually monthly, with state operational excellence leaders from throughout the country. And it has resulted in valuable roundtable discussions and connections between our states and covered timely topics related to operational excellence and continuous improvement. Our next Operational Excellence Forum will be a roundtable peer-to-peer conversation and will take place on May 11th at 2 o'clock Eastern for those of you who would like to join us. So thank you. Back to you, Jamie.
Thank you, John, so much. Those are excellent conversations for those who have an operational excellence or a lean shop or a Six Sigma shop, as well as those who are just passionate and just now starting the journey. Our next one, we are going to have more of a peer-to-peer conversation, where today we'll have more of a presentation and Q&A. So we hope you join us. If you're interested, feel free to reach out to the NASCA headquarters and we'll get you added to that list. So before we get started, we wanted to know where people are in their customer service journey. So we're going to launch a poll. Kayla's going to get that launched for us. So is customer service a core value in your organization? Would you say, yes, this is strongly encouraged, it's ingrained, it's championed by my leadership? Or yes, it's something we're still working on, it's somewhat ingrained and championed by some leaders, or not at this time. Maybe it's hit or miss. Some leaders, some employees have this as a strong value. Excellent. We've got those coming in. We'll give it about 10 more seconds. Excited to share this with you all. We've got quite a few votes in. So Kayla, if you'll want to go ahead and close that and share this with the group. There. So it's kind of interesting. Lots of people joining us today are very far in this journey. Customer service is a core value, strongly championed by leadership, with the other half saying it's somewhat, maybe championed by certain leaders. Very exciting. All right, so let's share the next poll. And then how is customer service most apparent in your internal operations? So we're going to talk specifically about departments of administration. So it's very, and you're just going to pick one for this. Where is it most apparent? So it's really obsessed in your vision and your leadership. Your team does customer journey mapping. You use feedback to redesign processes. You do small pilots to test the user and customer experience. You focus on speed of service, or you focus on the effectiveness and ease of services. So we've got some great results coming in. Really excited to share this. Just to help us know what people are doing around customer service. We'll give that about 10 more seconds. Excellent, if you'll share that. All right, so it looks like a lot of people on this call are using that customer service and feedback to redesign process. Lots of teams also really focused on the ease and effectiveness of service. So that's something we're going to talk about, as well as it being ingrained in the vision and the leadership, having customer-obsessed leaders. All right, well, that was excellent to share. We're going to close those two polls. Get it off my screen. And I'm going to introduce our next speaker. I'll go ahead and introduce all of our speakers, and then I'll hand it over to Paula. But today we have on the call Jason Jackson, who's the director of the Department of Administrative Service for the state of Nebraska. Also a research and policy chair, so had a big hand in helping define our top 10, as well as I can also admit that he championed customer service and customer experience. So I knew exactly who to go to when we were talking for panelists today. John Baronzelli, the Director of Rapid Results, a co-moderator or co-liaison on our Operational Excellence Forum. We have John Powell, who's going to co-moderate with me today. He's also with the Office of Rapid Results. And Paula Hildebrand, who's the Director of Strategic Initiatives at IBM Watson Health. So Paula, you're going to open us up with some framework around being customer obsessed. So Paula, I'm going to hand the floor to you.
All right, thank you. If you'd like to start the slides. So what I wanted to briefly touch on is our view at IBM, and specifically IBM Watson Health, on human-centered design and how we design our products and solutions to address the customer experience and the customer's needs. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And the next one. So serving our customer, the question that was raised was, who really is the customer? And we at IBM view the customer in two different flavors. Number one is the actual external customer. We spend a lot of time focusing on the constituents of state and local government who are looking to apply for benefits, who are looking to have a better government experience, who are trying to find the right places to go in a government agency, whether that government agency is Health and Human Services, whether it's something like applying for unemployment insurance, but people who are trying to get in and navigate their way through the government. And we find that many times, as I'm sure you're all familiar, we may all think, we meaning the global states and commercial, that our systems are easy to navigate and simple for the customers to access, when in reality, it's something that's very difficult for them to do. And it may rely on technology that they no longer have. Next slide, please. So what I wanted to talk specifically about is how we use human-centered design to really focus on these government agencies and place that ultimate citizen right in the center of designing the solutions. Next one. We have worked with Access HRA in New York City, and Access HRA was a public-private partnership where they were looking for ways to better serve citizens who no longer had access to any kind of technology other than their mobile systems, their mobile phones. They were citizens who might be homeless. A lot of them who, if you've been in New York, might be sitting at the top of a subway. And they were trying to find what programs and what benefits were available. And this is not just Health and Human Services, but it goes beyond and really takes into account 35 different programs in the state, or I should say in the city, that benefit the individual citizen. So we worked with them to say, all right, how do we move forward and provide a better citizen experience? And when we do, what does that really mean? How does it ultimately help the city in reducing the city's cost? Because customer experience, if it's a better one and provides the opportunity for people to be engaging with the government in more of a self-service environment, it means that it can also save money for the government as well. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So we used 3 different methods as we looked at this design thinking approach and working with New York City. The first one was doing user research, and one of our individuals would tell the story about coming in and shadowing how users were interacting with the existing systems, standing there and maybe entertaining a small child while the mom was trying to go through whatever she was interfacing to the government for, however she was trying to work with the government and apply for whatever it might be, whether it was a license or whether it was a human services type program. And then how we use design thinking and behavioral economics to further that solution in this public-private partnership. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So from our user research, as I mentioned, whatever you're doing in terms of customer experience, we really need to focus on making sure that the user's voice is engaged as early as possible. If your user is an internal constituent, you need to make sure that they are involved in the development of any systems as you engage with them, or the odds are you will deliver a system that they say is unusable. If it's an external user, it's sometimes a little bit more difficult, but understanding where they're coming from, understanding how they interact with the systems and what they need to get out of their government experience is critical. Then the next step in the process in our design thinking approach is really understanding what is the right problem. What are we trying to solve? Is the issue that someone needs to understand how to better navigate their way through, for instance, applying for unemployment insurance? Or is the issue one where someone needs a better experience to locate the best parks and recreational opportunities that are in your jurisdiction? How do they interface to those systems, and what is the problem you're trying to solve, and what kind of device will be used to support them? And finally, we know from behavioral economics, which we also apply, that small variations in how we interact with these applications can have a tremendous impact on the acceptance and the participation and the ultimate cost of delivering the systems. Go ahead and go to the next one, please. COVID taught us something, and I know everybody is pretty sick and tired at this point of talking about the pandemic and just wants to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But I think the one thing that COVID really shared, and while you'll see that this is a little bit more human services focused, it really runs the breadth of government. We were all in a situation where governments had to send their workers home. They were working remotely, and citizens were trying to interact with the government on everything from, these days, how do I get a COVID vaccination, to how do I stay in my home and not get kicked out because they tell me that there's some kind of rental assistance. I can't feed my family. How do I get food assistance? Oh, I've been called back to work. What can help me with child care? All of that was highlighted with respect to COVID. And the fact that people were now working from home, in many instances, in certain sections of this country, as we know, people do not have internet access. So they had a mobile device, and they were finding it very, very difficult to interface with their state governments. So we've seen this acceleration of focusing on the customer experience, and by that I mean the individual constituent, happening as a result of COVID. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So what do we do from an IBM perspective? When we think about an overall citizen experience, we make sure that that experience is designed so that it can be accessed by any device that a citizen might have. Whether we are using a mobile device, as you see in the center of the screen, whether we're using a laptop or a tablet. And when we've run statistics on how people have shifted during this whole pandemic, we're seeing more and more access by mobile devices. It is no longer sufficient or expected by a citizen that they have to find a tablet or a piece or a laptop. And interestingly enough, we're seeing lower and lower access by tablet users as they shift to cell phones or mobile devices. Go ahead and go to the next one, please. One thing that we do want to highlight is one of the systems that we built with this citizen experience as a result of COVID. We worked with Las Vegas, Nevada, which is Clark County, Nevada, where they had a 35% unemployment rate, and they had citizens who were quickly losing their homes. Yes, there was a stay on evictions, but they were in a rough situation where they were looking at potential evictions. And the challenge that they had is people had been sent home. Individuals wanted to apply for rental assistance, and the only way to do it was through a call center that was not really active during the height of the pandemic. So in this particular situation, we really focused ultimately on two different citizen experience or two different customer experiences. One was, how does the caseworker efficiently manage this application process, given what COVID had thrown at us? And the other one, how does the citizen apply for benefits? Because the citizen really was looking for a way to stay in their home, and the landlord was looking for ways to be paid for the rent that they were losing from keeping people in their homes. So this one really brought to the front that having that good, solid platform of how you interface with citizens enabled us to rapidly develop something that could support them as they were moving forward in a pandemic. Next slide, please. So that's it for me. Over to you, Jamie.
Yeah, thank you, Paula, so much for talking about your perspective. And we will be coming back to you because you're serving on our panelist. But it's excellent to learn what your thought leadership is and what IBM has learned around this over time, around the human-centered design, the user experience. So thank you for that opening framework. So with that, I'm going to kick it to our first question. This one's going to go to Jason first, then John. I know they flipped a coin on who would go first. But So, Jason, what's the status of customer experience in your state? I know when I go to your website, it's something I see right there front of your website, but what's going on in Nebraska? What's your use case there?
Well, I would say it leads everything we do. I mean, we at the end of the day, just altruistically, I think most state chief administrators, we do what we do. Most of our teammates in state government do what we do because we're altruistically motivated and we're here to serve. What's more is from our perspective, it helps us define our work and where we focus. So in the absence of customer empathy and customer focus, it's very difficult to define, okay, what are our customers' expectations of us? How do we measure success? How do we make the appropriate trade-offs so that we know we're investing in the right places? How do we know the impact that we're making so that we can hold ourselves accountable for our results? So collectively, that's what informs the reason that that's front and center of our mission. How that informs what we do operationally, from an administrative services perspective, of course, the preponderance of our customers are internal. Mm-hmm. But we also deploy our Center of Operational Excellence to come alongside our peer agencies that are serving our constituents and our neighbors and our communities, so that they can role model and employ those same procedures.
Yeah, thank you so much. I know we're going to dive into in a little bit here things around the trade-offs around the user experience. So we'll talk more about some of the things you talked about. But John, what's the use case in Illinois? What's the customer experience in your state?
Well, you mentioned, Jamie, that I am the chief administrator of the Illinois Rapid Results Program, and that is the state operational excellence program. And so that's really what our mission is to drive customer value in the state of Illinois agencies. As a matter of fact, our vision is a customer-focused culture in Illinois state government that embraces a lasting commitment to continuous improvement and respect for people. And that's where we're trying to go. And we have a lot of tools and techniques that can help get us there. But customer focus, as Jason mentioned, starts at the top. And in Illinois, it starts with Governor J.B. Pritzker. And I think a lot of people probably know he is family owned the Hyatt Regency. And so customer service, customer experience is something that he lives and breathes every day as a businessman. If you've ever stayed at the Hyatt Regency in Chicago, you'll understand that. If you haven't, I'll say it's not cheap, but it is a remarkable place. I got to go once as part of a conference that was the conference hotel. And from the moment you walk in to the moment you check out, you feel like a rock star because every aspect of that experience has been shaped for the customer. So he brought that to Illinois and he told his director that he wanted that kind of experience in Illinois state government. That's the first level. The second level, it has to be translated to the individual agency. And Rapid Results is part of the Department of Central Management Services in the state of Illinois. And our state chief administrative officer, our director, is Janelle Ford, and she is one of the most talented executives I've ever had the privilege to work with. And Janelle really looked at CMS and where we were. And what she saw a lot of processes and systems that weren't working well. The only way they worked was because of what we call the superhero employee, the person that could step in, that could slay that dragon of a process and make things happen. And that's great for the urgent issues, but it doesn't work on a day-to-day basis. And so you may be able to satisfy the customer for this one time, but on a day-to-day basis, you're not going to have that great customer experience. And so what she had us do is really look inside of ourselves and look at our processes and systems. And she said, operational excellence in CMS drives customer satisfaction throughout the rest of the state. We got to get our processes and systems in order. And the analogy she used was brilliant. She said, you know, when you're on an airplane and the flight attendant is explaining what will happen if the cabin loses pressure when the oxygen mask dropped from the ceiling. She said, you are instructed to put that mask on yourself first, make sure it works before you turn to others. And she said, we can't help the other agencies if we don't first help ourselves. And so what we're really doing is focusing on improving our processes and our systems with the understanding that customer satisfaction follows that. And in doing that, she really embraces in a brilliant way a fundamental concept of operational excellence. And that is, when I slow down, I go fast. When I slow down, when I plan, design, execute flawlessly, things move fast. So that's where we're at.
Well, thank you. And this concept of the superhero employee, I think that definitely rings true of someone who just sludges through all the processes that we've built up is really the only way it's happening. All right, John Powell, you have the next question.
All right, thank you. This next question is for Paula and Jason, and Paula, you'll take it first. It's all about customer-focused leadership. So why is that important? And do you need top-down support to be customer-focused? And how does that customer-focused strategy drive your productivity, innovation, and efficiency? So Paula, you'll lead us off.
And Paula, we'll get you unmuted.
Okay. Yes, you absolutely need management support when you are focusing on customer service or the customer experience. And as I think of, addressing that question from a leadership perspective, I really want to put myself in the place of, if I am a citizen and I'm accessing government and why do I do that? Well, I do it because I either need help, I've got a problem I need to solve, I need information, or it's some kind of process I have to go through with licensing, or it's a business who's applying for whatever they need. If I keep that in mind, I can design and I can provide the right customer experience for each one of those constituents. But if senior management is not on board, as you mentioned, if you don't have a Governor Pritzker who is saying, my citizens need to be treated like they're guests of the Hyatt Regency, you'll fail every single time. And from the corporate world, we absolutely have to focus on the customer, or we're not going to be in business. Government, you're in business regardless. So it's kind of putting that commercial mindset into government about thinking about, how do I handle the citizens? So don't know if that completely answered your question, but I'll pass it over to John.
Thank you. Jason.
Yeah, I would agree with Paula, though I guess I would add just a little nuance that I think it might depend upon the maturity of the culture of your organization in terms of rallying around the customer. Just speaking candidly to my fellow colleagues, if the Nebraska experience is representative, when the Ricketts administration took office, I would characterize the predisposition of the bureaucracy as kind of to solve for minimizing its work rather than necessarily solving for maximizing customer experience. So it does take a force of will kind of top down to move the needle. But that having been said, I think if you're successful at building a culture of customer focus and you're hiring for people that are passionate about caring for others, that journey can be one where that tops down pressure doesn't become as onerous or as necessary to be kind of a constant force in the room. As to its importance, the only thing I would add to what Paula said is in the absence of customer focus and really understanding from your customer's perspective, what is important to them. Again, I'm kind of at a loss for how do you measure your own success? How are you able to even identify where you should be focusing your time, your priorities, continuously improving, et cetera. So it really, for us, is kind of foundational to an organizational culture of operational excellence.
All right, thank you both. I'll kick it back to you, Jamie, for the next question.
Thank you. So at NASCA, we work with the chief administrators, and often their agencies work with other internal government agencies, and then those agencies work with the citizens. So when having this conversation, I want you guys, both Jason and John, to define who is your customer. How do you identify who the customer is? Jason kind of identified that oftentimes some of these processes minimize the internal work, but then put the burden on the constituent. Well, which customer are you trying to help there? So we'll talk a little bit about who's the customer and then getting to trade-offs. So since I went to Jason first, we'll start with John.
Well, great. And that's a difficult question to answer in state government. Over my career, I have sat in training rooms with consultants that are there to help us. And we've had discussions about customers, and I've had a lot of the experiences where we'd talk with this consultant and list out like 12 or 13 customers, the legislature, the citizen, the other employees, and it really feels good in that training room. But it's not very helpful to the frontline employee who's trying to execute a process. If you got 9 different customers, pulling you in every direction, which one do you listen to? So it's not really helpful. So I like what Paula said about really focusing on two. And that's really what needs to happen in state government. I like to think of Illinois state government as this big holding company, kind of like Berkshire Hathaway, one of my favorite companies. And the individual agencies are businesses that have their own specific missions to accomplish. Now, the legislature is the board of directors, and they direct the actions of the entities at a high level. Management is the governor's office and his directors. And it's not a perfect analogy, but where it really starts to come together is when you talk about the taxpayer, because they are the shareholder. What the shareholders do, they capitalize the business. And that's exactly what taxpayers do as well. They capitalize the business. So some instances, the taxpayer can be a customer, and I think it's useful to look at it from that perspective. But how we answer that question in Illinois and Rapid Results is, who is the customer? It depends. It depends on the process that we're analyzing. Because when we're analyzing a process, the customer is the recipient of the product or service that is provided. And we focus on delivering value to that person. The other elements are stakeholders. They're shareholders, stakeholders, and we got to align their requirements with the requirements of the customer. They're important, but they should never be followed at the peril of the customer, always the customer focus. So that's how we answer that.
Yeah, and Jason, what about you? How does your team define the customer?
I'd be hard pressed to improve upon John's answer. I guess what I will just add is, and kind of to credit my colleagues around the country, is a recognition that I think the burden in the public sector is it's more difficult to define whom your customer is than our colleagues in the private sector. And so a recognition of just the complexity that's associated with that. John's definition of kind of the end user of any service, I think, is appropriate in any context. Perhaps the one just nugget I would offer for the benefit of my peers around the country is I personally stay laser focused on my colleagues in the governor's cabinet as my personal customer. And as a consequence, I spend a great deal of energy just staying connected to them, soliciting their feedback on how we're supporting them, trying to be attuned to aspects of our services that are either enhancing their ability to serve Nebraska or in any other way undermining their operations, so that can be the focus of our effort. And then always communicating with them real time about how we're moving the needle against their expectations, particularly if they've identified an aspect of our business that's underperforming. So so there's the agency view, which is, I think what John talked about. And then just personally in my role as a chief administrator, I regard my peers on the governor's team as my customer and solve for them.
And Jason, we're going to stay right there. So if you're laser focused on peers, is there ever any time where you have trade-offs? You have to sacrifice an agency's need for the enterprise need, or sacrifice a little bit of the citizens' need for the agency's need. How do you make those trade-offs?
Less the latter, more the former. So, what we talk about is we always want 3 stakeholder solutions, right? We're not interested in things that, it needs to work for the taxpayer, needs to work for our teammates, and it needs to work for our customers. We generally don't pursue things that, compromise against the objectives or degrade the outcomes for any of those. But in terms of the former, I think chief administrators across the country can appreciate that we are often burdened with having to solve for the enterprise as a whole and not optimizing for any individual agency. John drew the analogy of kind of a large business with a lot of vertical business units, and that's very much how I think about state government as well. And we talk about how we're all wearing our state of Nebraska jersey. We're not wearing our individual Health and Human Services jersey, or our Veterans Affairs jersey, or our administrative. And so one example I'll just throw out that's very real for us right now is optimizing our real estate portfolio and trying to minimize our real estate footprint and costs generally, which means every agency isn't going to get everything on its wish list. What we'll be doing is kind of trying to make trade-offs so that we're optimizing for the totality of the team, and everybody gets the preponderance of what they want, but not necessarily everything on their wish list.
And anyone else, Paula or John, are there any other trade-offs that you have to make either for the enterprise view to help an agency or for the citizen view to help an agency? Any thoughts on trade-offs?
So from our perspective, we look at things as we ultimately have two customers, especially since, my group only deals with government.
Mm.
The two customers are the individual who has signed our contract or the agency who has signed our contract. But for us, it's the citizen who is engaging with that agency. So we have to solve for both. And the trade-offs that we get into, because we focus a lot in the human services space, is there is sometimes a reticence by the government entity to really improve the processes for the citizen, as strange as this sounds, because it could mean I'm paying out more in terms of benefits. So it's kind of an interesting dichotomy that you see at times with various states. Sometimes it's politically dependent, unfortunately, but that's the trade-off that you make, because it may be simpler for the citizen, but that means that there's more outlay in terms of benefits. I would say the other trade-off that we have is trying to make sure, because we also deal with, tools that people use in situations where they're removing children because of abuse. That's a whole different environment where now you're really designing and thinking about your customer who is a child. And how do you do things that are better for that child and still do it within the guise of the policy and the rules of the policy? So yeah, there's always this, who are you working for, and ultimately, what decision do you make? And that's where you get back to who is the user and what is the problem you were trying to solve.
Yeah, and a really interesting, thanks for bringing that to the forefront about the trade-offs of, as you make it more user-friendly, that means more users are going to use it, whether that means a higher revenue cost or more services, more people are now able to access services. So an interesting conversation there. All right, John, anything before we go to the next one?
Well, I would say that often when I find trade-offs, they're driven by statute, administrative rule, or policies, and that requires those trade-offs. And what's interesting about that is, if you really think about it, the shareholders or the taxpayers, that's them speaking. They elect the representative passed the laws, and the laws set the bounds for the administrative rule to be written, which have to be approved by the legislature. So if we're following the statute, we're actually doing what our customers want. So really, it's looking at those steps as adding value, not perhaps to the taxpayer or the customer, but it does add value to the shareholder, the taxpayer, and the legislature, because that's what they want us to do. And so there's some safety in those business value added steps. Now, a lot of people tell me, well, John, that's kind of naive. And perhaps it is, but it's the only system we have. We do not have a democracy. As a taxpayer, we don't get to vote on every single issue that comes in. We have to vote on representatives, and the representatives take our interest, and we have to trust them in order to put these pieces in place. So embracing those business value added, to me, is how you reconcile those trade-offs and figuring out how to minimize those whenever possible so you can deliver more value to the customer. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you. All right, John, I think you have the next couple questions.
Yes, I do. This next question is for Paula. How do you balance a customer experience with risk?
So in our opinion, if you do not deliver the appropriate customer experience, that's the greatest risk. We're working with, in our design processes, in the way we engage with our clients, in our projects, we are ultimately designing something that the customer, whoever the customer is, in this case, has to accept. So if you do not develop it to customer specifications, if you do not engage the customer throughout this process, you're going to end up in a situation where the solution is not accepted, and that's ultimately the greatest risk for us. So I think if I go back to and say, how do you kind of manage the risk out of a customer experience situation? It's back to those steps that I talked about. where you focus on what are the user's real needs, what's the user experience supposed to be like, what problem are you trying to solve, and then from a behavioral perspective, what components do you adjust so that it is the best experience that the individual user could have or the customer can have.
All right, thank you. Another question. This is for everyone, and we'll keep it with you, Paula. And then John, you can follow her up, and Jason will be third. How do you make the customer experience your compass for your organization, and how does it become a habit within your organization?
For us, it's part of our methodology. It's honestly the way we design as IBM. We design all of our products. We design all of our services. The customer has to be at the center. And I'll go back to, we're a large corporation. And if the customers aren't happy with the solutions, we're not in business. So it is something that happens from the top level of our corporation all the way through the entire corporation, focusing on what do we do to add value, provide the best customer experience, improve our own business processes, because as a large corporation, and I'm sure there are those of you on the phone who have done business with IBM, and you'll kind of laugh at this, we've got processes that are as cumbersome at times as government. And we have to constantly focus on how do we do a better job? How do we improve so that we don't make it cumbersome? I know when I sit with our senior management, they are all focused on, are we providing the best experience that we can for the customers? Is this where we should be going, what we should be doing? And if we are, as a company, developing something that does not fit into that customer experience and does not provide the innovation that organizations are looking for, we don't do it. Pure and simple. It's throughout the organization.
All right, John, you have anything you want to add?
I love Paula's answer, and that customer focus is so incredibly important. What I'd add for the state of Illinois is that focus is extremely important, but if you've got a terrible system that you're in charge of, it doesn't matter how much you focus on customer focus. If the system isn't designed to allow the employee to succeed, you're not going to get there. So you got to understand that systems drive behavior. They just drive the outcome. So really focusing less on people and more on systems to get you where you want to go. And then to add on to what Paula said, and I think the most important takeaway from what she said is you get more of what you celebrate. And when that's celebrated, when it's embraced, when it is just focused throughout the organization, I think you get there. But you got to fix those systems first.
Thanks, John. Jason, you want to add something?
Yeah, just you get more of what you celebrate. You also get more of what you measure. In Nebraska, our experience when the Ricketts administration took over was there wasn't a lot of measurement, either organizationally or individually. And so building both organizational and then individual performance metrics into just how we run our business. Just anecdotally, when I came into my role, you might ask somebody, hey, are you doing a good job? And they'll say, yes. And then you ask them, well, how do you know? And you'll just get a blank stare. And so that becomes part of just that rigor of also your performance management and evaluation process to build that into your culture.
Great. All right, Jason, just to follow up here. In Nebraska, customer focus is actually in your agency goals. And as Jamie mentioned, it's right there on your website. So why is that important?
I fear I'm going to sound like a broken record. I just think it's our true north because it helps us define what's important in terms of where we prioritize our energy and our time. In the absence of good customer back information and empathy for the customer's experience, it becomes very difficult to figure out how to prioritize. And so that's why we make it front and center in terms of our mission.
All right, thank you. Back over to you, Jamie, for the next question.
Yeah, thank you, John. We can really sense the passion and mission and that everyone on the call has right now around customer service. But Jason led us right into the next question about measurement. And before I ask this question, I want to remind everyone on the call, we'll be going to Q&A here in a little bit. So please drop your questions in the chat. Or because this forum, we would love to get our members involved. We could unmute you and spotlight you, and you can ask the question yourself. So definitely be thinking of a question. but let's dive into measurement. So this will go to all of them, but we'll start with Jason because he brought it up. How do you measure customer experience? Do you guys have a tool? Do you have a survey? What are you using? And is it different for each department?
Yeah, I think it's incumbent upon process owners and product owners, again, to go back to borrow some language that John used at the top, to understand what is the desired customer experience of that respective process and what is the best way to quantify that experience and measure it. Unfortunately, the easiest example I have in my head actually flows from my private sector experience at Intuit, where we made TurboTax. And for TurboTax and do-it-yourself software users, it was all about maximize my refund and the ease of the use of the product, right? And you understand that by first and foremost kind of talking to your customer and being very empathetic, walking in their shoes about what their experience is. And then defining back from that experience what your measures of success are. And so what we talk about in Nebraska is that's part of any product owner, process owner's journey and leadership expectations, is that they're talking to their customers, understanding the experience, designing measures of success that flow from those aspirations, and then somehow design a listening post out there that helps you obtain that, whether it's customer behavior, whether it's usage, whether it's time, whether it's a survey, whatever that may be. Design that listening post that helps you get to that measure.
Yeah, great advice. And I'm hearing that each agency is going to do it slightly different for their product or their service. There's not one standardized tool in Nebraska.
No, absolutely. It's entirely dependent upon, for Access Nebraska, which is our primary public assistance call center, it's about speed to answer. Is the main vehicle that we use to understand what the experience is. But, in our Transportation Services Bureau, in terms of our fleet management at DAS, it's about, hey, what percentage of agency vehicles are being used 1,000 miles a month? So it could be, it's entirely contingent upon what that individual service is and what your customer is telling you need, and then the tools available to you to try to measure it. And we're very kind of tool agnostic. Or methodology agnostic, and it's more just about defining the right thing based on your constraints for that particular line of service.
Absolutely. Thank you. What about John? Do you guys have a specific tool or survey for customer experience? Is it agency specific?
I like what Jason said, and he's exactly right. In Illinois, it's the same kind of thing. We really rely on the process owners, the system owners to really determine what those outcomes are and put some sort of process in place to measure. Obviously, surveys are a great way to go. Actually documenting the conformance to requirements is a good way as well, kind of indirect. But I would offer that one of the founders of quality management and by extension operational excellence was a guy named W. Edward Deming. And he was famous for saying some things are not measurable, they're not knowable. And I think it is important to keep that in mind. And I want to tell a quick story about this because I think it's very interesting. It was a successful failure on our part. When we first launched the Rapid Results program, we worked with an agency that had a large call center. And the call center was having wait times that were in the hours. I mean, can you imagine? Well, you don't have to imagine, you probably experienced that, but you call an agency and wait for hours until you get to talk to somebody. And those were their average wait times. The spikes were even higher than that. So they wanted to redesign the process. We did everything right. We got the team together. We got input from the frontline employee. They put together a fantastic process. And then to sustain it, like Jason said, you got to measure in order to sustain it. And we were measuring those wait times, and they were fantastic, just little blips up and down. And then all of a sudden, one day, they just shot back up again, and they were worse than they were when we started. And this was alarming, to say the least. And so we were trying to figure out what was going on in this complicated process. And a leader we had trained in this agency, he was the agency's chief auditor, he decided to do some root cause analysis. So he did some investigation. And what he determined was just a few days before that spike, a letter went out to all of the agency's customers. And he got hold of that letter. He analyzed it and determined that letter was written at like the 19th or 20th grade reading level. And what happened was all these people were calling in because they thought their benefits were going to get cut and they didn't understand the letter. And the people in the call center had to walk them through and assure them that they were not going to lose their benefits. And that really highlights one of our principles, which we call going to the Gemba. Gemba is a Japanese word that translates as the real place or where the truth may be found. And we tell executives, don't just concentrate on measures, get out of your office, talk to people on the front lines, go to where the problem's occurring so you can figure out what is happening. So I love to tell that story. That's a very interesting one.
All right, then we will go on to our next one, unless Paula have any specific tool that IBM uses for customer experience.
Yes, if I could.
Yeah.
So, and if you happen to see a cattail walk across the screen, the joys of working from home, he's decided it's time to visit, everyone. So yes, IBM has a couple of different tools. So number one, we do survey all of our customers and ask for their feedback on specific categories. Based on that, if the rankings are low for some reason, then there are individual plans on how we address that customer experience or customer satisfaction issue. And we, again, take that very seriously. That starts at the senior executive level of our corporation. For our end user clients, I'll say the people, as John mentioned, who might be receiving those benefits, we measure things like abandonment on portals. So if I'm going through an application process for benefits, do I make it all the way through the process? Because that tells us that we have delivered an experience that someone can understand and they can make it through on their own without calling anyone. If we find that there's a lot of abandonments, we know we need to tweak the solution. For our products, we have another process where we are constantly asking our customers, and this would be state agency members, state departments, commercial customers. If you're using this particular product, what could we be doing to enhance or improve it? Submit your suggestions, and those go into our roadmaps for developing our products. So, as a corporation, you have to have lots of these different processes in place and lots of different tools in place, again, to focus on who is your end client, as well as who is the individual that's signed the contract with us so that we deliver appropriately. And finally, the last point of that is the ultimate kind of definition of acceptance or how we manage these tools is if you're delivering a project, there has to be user acceptance or you don't get sign off on that project. And, you can spend a lot of time developing something. If you haven't, again, engaged along the way and involved that end user in the entire process, you're not going to have acceptance of the project. And that's not something anyone wants to see happen.
Lots of great lessons there. Again, if you have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat or raise your hand. And then I also saw Sarah reminded there's a great NASCA. We did a case study with LNW Harvard with Michigan, and specifically on their customer satisfaction survey. So I know a lot of states do annual or semi-annual customer satisfaction surveys, specifically as their tool to measure customer satisfaction for the Department of Administration. But John, take us to the next question.
We'll start off with John Baranzelli on this. It's often the role of state employees to have to translate a bureaucratic process to the citizen who contacts us. Could you give an example of such a situation?
Well, what I would say is that if we're at this point, then we have failed miserably. It should not be complicated for people to access the products and services they want. This right here, my iPhone, is one of the most complicated pieces of software and hardware on the planet. It doesn't come with an operating manual. It's completely intuitive. It comes out of the box and I can figure out how it works. And our processes and systems need to be more intuitive as well. So that's why we embrace the goals of easier, better, faster, cheaper in that order with our Rapid Result program. And the first thing we concentrate on is making things easier. I've got a quick story. We're working with an agency right now that has two different divisions that are involved in the issuance of a permit. One division reviews the permit application and they make a determination whether it's approved or denied. If it's denied, there's a process for an appeal. Another division does. Now, what happens if you're denied for your permit? You get a letter that explains you've been denied, and then they copy the statute language specifically and put, if you want to file an appeal, here's how you do it. And they took statutory language in there. And what ended up happening was it was so complicated, people didn't know how to file for an appeal, to the point where customers people who have been denied, we're hiring attorneys to process their appeal for them, talk about waste. Fortunately, we got a great team in there in both divisions. And so what we're trying to do is just sit down together and figure out how we can make this process easier for people who've had their application denied and they can pursue the appeal. So that's my story.
All right, well, it's 9 till, so I'm going to send it back to you, Jamie, to get our user submitted questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and John, thank you so much for telling that story. I know back in my government days, we also went through that process where we took letters that went out to the citizen and thought through, could a citizen really understand what we are trying to say here? So often thinking about that user experience that Paula has been talking about and really putting yourselves in their shoes. So we do have a question that came from Cindy Dixon. All right, so Cindy asked, we can definitely sense your guys' passion and how bought in you guys are to citizen experience, but how do you educate your other team members on the core values of customer experience and customer expectations? How does it get past the leadership's, your guys' core value, core mission to your team? All right, Paula, I haven't started with you yet. So Paula, we're going to start with you.
Okay.
We can definitely sense that IBM really has that core value. Do you guys do anything to educate team members to make this a core value throughout the company?
Well, again, it goes back to when we are developing, either products or services, it's part of the methodology. It's part of, let's focus on what the user experience. We're, in fact, in the roadmap for our products, one of the things that we look at in our release schedule is a whole focus area of improving the user experience or the customer experience. So it's just part of our DNA, and how do you get team members on board? Especially working in the space that we're in, people are really passionate about doing a better job of serving health and human services constituents. Ultimately, that child who's been abandoned or abused, that senior citizen who might be food insecure and also has medical issues. So there's a passion behind the team. And when you find members of your team that are passionate about ultimately serving the end constituent, it's kind of like cancer in a good way. It grows and it proliferates through the organization. So I would say, it's a combination of methodology, corporate structure, leadership, but more than anything else, the team gets on board and the team is really focused and passionate about doing the best job that they can for the ultimate customer.
It almost sounds like what you're saying. It becomes contagious. Some
Yes,
team members want it, other team members want it. And
Better
it really
C
grows.
word.
Thank you, Paula. What about Jason? How have you educated your team, or how do you get them to buy into customer experience, customer focus?
I'm going to respond to that one, Jamie, but I'm actually really passionate about the former question too. So I'm going to briefly kind of come back and back up John and just say I loved what John said, because that's what Nebraska does as well. Is, hey, if a process is cumbersome, we want to fix that. What I would add to John's answer is we also we keep cumbersome in the back office and we overinvest in the front office so that it doesn't impact our constituents. And I'm passionate about that because I think when government is cumbersome or inaccessible, it accrues most to the detriment of the vulnerable and the disadvantaged. People who are sophisticated, people who have social capital, organizations that have resources, they can generally overcome those obstacles. But it's the people that are most in need of our services that are most inhibited by that. And so as one example, in Nebraska, we launched a procurement concierge program that basically comes alongside and walks any bidder for state government contracts through our process and helps them navigate that. And what would be cumbersome on the back end, we make it really easy on the front end so that we don't create barriers for businesses that might not have the resources of larger corporate partners. So just one more kind of click down on that. With respect to how we view it in the culture, I'm going to be a little tactical here and say, I suspect IBM has a corporate mission statement and vision statement. When the Ricketts administration came into office, I mean, that's a best practice in the private sector. When the Ricketts administration came into office, Nebraska state government didn't have either. And so there was no unifying vision or mission statement that was a rallying cry for everybody in the organization. So first and foremost was implementing those. And then it became about driving awareness throughout the organization. And now I'll be really tactical and say one way we did that was we just made it everybody's screensaver on everybody's computer throughout state government. And let me tell you, they love that. They don't. But they all remember it. So that's the important thing.
Put it right there, front and center. And Jason, you brought up a really important point of making things really customer centric and customer easy will also help those who are very vulnerable or those who need access to government, making sure that they can access that, making sure that people can do business with government if they want to do business with government. So thank you for highlighting that. We only have a few minutes left, so I'm just going to throw a curveball right at the end. What is your biggest leadership lesson? So we have people from all over the country listening in, lots of offices of operational excellence and rapid results. We have lots of people of a part of our forum. Is there any big last takeaway you want to share with this group? And I'll pause to give everyone a moment because it's a curveball here, but just last big takeaway to everyone. And then after they do that takeaway, John, I'll let you, pal, do one last pitch for the Operational Excellence Forum, and I'll close it out. All right, John Baranzelli, final thought.
Final thought, I think the two most important characteristics of leadership in order to achieve the customer focus that we're talking about is one, humility, the ability to admit when you've made a mistake, the ability to ask yourself, are we moving in the right direction? Just continually to evaluate your progress. And then the second one is to be an example. So that's probably been the most important thing that I've learned as a leader over my 31 years. If I want my employees to embrace customer focus, then I need to embrace that. I need to let them see me embracing customer focus. So what I need to understand is if I talk about a customer focus and then I do something else, they're going to follow my actions, not my words. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. What about you, Paula?
Mine would be also 2 points. You have to set the vision so that everybody understands what the vision is, but ultimately it's about the team. If you have one person that is not aligning, you still need to focus back on it's got to be about the team. A leader can do nothing without the team. The team can do nothing without the team. So if you're going to deliver that true customer experience, you do it from the approach of it's a team experience.
All right. And Jason?
I'll just, get out and talk to your customers. I mean, it's easier in government than in the private sector to hunker down and not have contact with your customers in many roles throughout state government. So being forceful and purposeful about that. And then being ready to experiment. Think about how to do lightweight experiments and test those experiments with your customers, and not concerning yourself with having statistical significance and those types of things. You'll never get to innovation in the absence of talking to your customers and lightweight experiences and getting their feedback.
Thank you so much. And Cindy Dixon echoed that, go talk to your customers. It may be painful, but very informative. Well, I want to thank our panelists so much. And John Powell, for those who want to stay active in the Operational Excellence Forum, any last reason why they should do that?
Valuable discussion, valuable insights on the topics of continuous improvement and operational excellence. Like I mentioned earlier, our next session will be May 11th at 2:00 Eastern. So we hope you can make it.
Thank you. And that one will be more conversational. So not a formal presentation, peer-to-peer conversations. We hope to see you there. If you're interested, reach out to anyone from the NASCA team and we will get you added. Well, with that concludes our forum, our Top 10 live today. We are really honored to have our panelists, John Baranzelli, Jason Jackson, and Paula Hildebrand. You guys are so passionate about customer experience. We learned so much. We learned about that it needs to be top down, that you need to talk to your customers, that you need to gather feedback, that each agency is going to do it different for their product or their service. So we are glad to be able to share this. This will also be available at a pre-recording in about a week. Thank you, everyone.